Ratio problems. We're going to look at 3 different styles of ratio problems and all of them involving sharing. So here are 3 questions, very similar in many ways, but different in others. What I suggest you do is divide your page up the same way as I have, into 3 columns, and to write these at the top, and then we can focus on what's the difference between the questions and what's the same about these questions, and how do we represent them as diagrams, because drawing diagrams is the key to getting every one of these right. So I'd pause now, copy these out and the layout, and then we'll complete them. So our focus is going to be just on this page. We're going to draw the diagrams for each of them and find one part. That's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to fully answer the question. So looking at number 1 here, what I need to do to start with is draw my diagram. So Tom and Bob share the money in the ratio of 3:5. So Tom, he gets 3, and Bob, he gets 5. So that's the beginning of my diagram, and I always start that way. It now says they share £160, so I know that that there is 160. So when I'm looking at this, I can see that Tom's 3 and Bob's 5 is 160. So I've drawn the diagram for the first one. I'm now going to go along and draw the diagram for the second one, and let's see what's the same and what's different. So Tom and Bob share money in the ratio of 3:5. Well, that's the same, so let me draw that part out, the same. That's Tom, and here's Bob. So here is an example of Tom and Bob again. The diagram's nearly identical. It says here Bob gets 160. Now it's only Bob that gets 160, so this bit here is 160 now. Notice the difference between this here, when we said they shared 160, so they all share 160, so all 8 of these blocks equal 160. And here where we say Bob gets 160, where we're only saying these 5 equal 160. So though the diagram starts the same, the arrow is at different places. So let's go on to the third one and see what's the same and what's different here. So Tom and Bob share money in the ratio of 3:5. Well, that's the same again. 1, 2, 3. Bob, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, here, Bob gets £160 more than Tom. So Bob gets £160 more than Tom. So the bit that's more is that bit there. That's the bit more that Bob gets. As we can see, he has 2 more blocks than Tom. So there, that's £160. So the questions, the first line of each question is exactly the same, and our diagram starts exactly the same. But the difference is they share 160, so all of that's 160. Bob gets 160, so just this bit's equal to 160. And Bob gets 160 more than Tom, so this bit, the more bit, the extra part is 160. Now we go back and we have to find one part. One part's the key bit in ratio. What's one part worth? So one part for the first question, it's 160 divided by, well, how many parts are equal to 160? So if I look, all of these are equal to 160, so there's 8 of them. So I'm going to divide by 8 and 1 part is 20. Here, 1 part again. Well, it's still 160, but how many parts are 160? Well, it's just this that's equivalent to 160. So it's 5 parts. So I'm going to divide by 5, and that would give me 32. And the last question, again, I need to find what 1 part is, and it's 160. And how many parts are equal to 160 for my diagram? So I look at my diagram, 160 is equivalent to 2 parts, so I'm now going to divide it by 2. So here 1 part is equal to 80. So the questions are very, very similar, but this extra piece of information here makes them different, and it's that difference that we display on the diagram that then helps us to work out what do we divide 160 by and what is 1 part equivalent to, because they're each, this one's 1 part's 20, this one part is 32, and this one part is 80. On the next pages, I'm going to complete question 1, question 2, question 3. But the key when attempting these questions is draw the diagram, get this arrow in the right place, find 1 part, then the rest of the question's easy. So let's look at question 1 in more detail. So here's question 1 taking up a whole page. You just can carry on, hopefully on your piece of paper. And here I have Tom, I have Bob, and that how they share 160. So if you remember, all of that's equal to 160. So 1 part is equal to 160 divided by 8, which equals 20. So how much does Tom get? Well, Tom gets 20 times 3, and the reason it's by 3 is because he gets 3 parts. So 1 part's worth 20, he's got 3 parts, so therefore that's going to be 60. And Bob, well, Bob, he gets 5 parts and they're each 20, so 20 times 5 is 100. So there are 2 answers. Bob gets £60 and Tom gets £60 and Bob gets £100. Diagram. Make sure you mark on 160, find 1 part, then find Tom's, then find Bob's. So let's do the second one. Make sure you pause it, make sure you copy that out before you move on to the second one. So the second one, Bob and Tom share money in the ratio of 3 to 5. So here we go. Let's draw 3 out for Tom. And Bob, we're drawing out 5 again. Here's the key bit. Bob gets 160. Where do I draw that arrow? So here, that little bit there is equal to 160. Just Bob's bit. How do I find 1 part? Well, I do 1 part equals 160 divided by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, divided by 5, and I get 32. So I now know that 1 part is equal to 32. So Tom, how much does Tom get? Well, Tom, he gets 3 times 32, so he gets £96. And Bob, well, I know how much Bob gets already because that was in the question, so I can just write 160. And there's my 2 answers for Bob and Tom this time. So it comes back to the drawing the diagram, putting on where our 160 is, finding 1 part, then Tom, then Bob. Right, the last question. So Bob gets £160 more than Tom. So let's draw this diagram out. Again, we've got Tom, and he gets 3, and Bob, and it's 5. Bob gets £160 more than Tom, so this is the bit extra that Bob gets, and that bit extra must equal 160. So 1 part is equal to 160 divided by 2, which is equal to 80, because 160 is equivalent to 2 parts. So I've now found out what 1 part is. So how much does Tom now get? Well, Tom gets 3 lots of 80 because Tom gets 3 parts. So that's 240. And Bob, he gets 5 lots of 80 because he gets 5 parts, and that's 400. And that's all 3 questions solved. And it's key, again, those diagrams give you how to work the answer out. Now you need to do some practice.